let me just start by introducing P.G. O'Rourke, who probably doesn't need much introduction to most of you, but I'm going to do it anyway. He already has 14 best-selling books, so you'd think he'd take a break, but I'm glad he hasn't, because his latest, Don't Vote, It Just Encourages the Bastards, is a very funny book. I have read it, and it really is, and especially considering it has footnotes, because you don't usually see that combo together much. I'm new to academia, but footnotes and funny don't usually go together. If you don't know him as an author, then you've probably seen him on television. He's always on television, a lot, but then so is The Situation. So that's not as distinguishing as...
I promise not to take my shirt off.
Or Dancing with the Stars. But he also, really, the distinguishing thing that he does in broadcasting to me is he's on the NPR quiz show, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. He's a wonderful panelist on that. He does have, and I like this particular note in his bio, he has more citations in the Penguin Dictionary of Humorous Quotations than any other living writer, you know. And both Time Magazine and the Wall Street Journal have called him the funniest writer in America. So please welcome P.G. O'Rourke.
Thank you. Thank you.
He is also a conservative. He is a funny conservative. So how lonely is that, actually?
There are a lot of funny conservatives. It's just a matter of whether it's on purpose or not.
Christine O'Donnell comes to mind.
Yeah, okay, yeah, she's
the non-witch, masturbating, hating woman.
I was so glad that she was not a witch. You know, when you have to explain that, you know you're in trouble. It's not a witch. Hey, but did Hillary ever come out? No, I mean, no. Did Hillary ever come out and clear that up? Because I recall her being called a witch rather frequently.
Oh, dear. Well, okay.
But she never came right out and just straightened out the public on that the way that Christine O'Donnell had. Actually, when I heard about that first, I thought it was Rosie O'Donnell, and I thought, no, the Tea Party really is crazy.
I'm going to get back to that in a minute. In your book, and this is interesting. You say that after 40 years of writing political commentary that occurred to you to ask yourself the question, what the hell have I been talking about? And you managed to narrow it down to what you called the naked threesome of politics: power, freedom, and responsibility. And you say that we pay with our freedom to relieve ourselves of our responsibilities, and this is how others get their power over us, which is a really interesting way to put it. So start with the first thing, power. You worry that the individual has handed over too much power to the government. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's a concern. You know, obviously our government is limited in its powers, maybe not limited enough. And the huge extension of positive rights, as they're called. Isaiah Berlin came up with this distinction. There are negative and positive rights. Your negative rights are the rights, your right to freedom of speech, your right to freedom of religion, your right to assembly. Your negative rights do not impinge on anyone else's rights. No matter how strongly you believe in a certain religious doctrine, that doesn't keep somebody else from believing in another religious doctrine, and so on. At least in theory, until you start bombing them or something. Positive rights are rights to material goods. You know, we say people have a right to education, they have a right to housing, they have a right to health care, they have a right, so on. Once you start talking about rights to material benefits, you are talking about something that is zero sum, at least at any given moment. In order to fulfill somebody's right to a certain material good, you have to take some goods and services from somebody else, usually in the form of taxation. Now, I'm not necessarily opposed to the redistributive aspect of government. All governments have an element of redistribution, and that's inevitable. All societies have an element of redistribution. But the thing that's important to understand is that when you transfer goods and services from one group of people to another group of people, not only does the first group of people lose those goods and services being transferred, but all people, whether they're recipients or donors or recipients, lose power to a political structure that has to be put in place in order to effect this transfer. Hence, we find something like public education, which I think we should all be personally responsible for as much as possible with our children. We find this thing slipping from our grasp, our control of it slipping from our grasp, because we have created political structures, both large and small, to affect the transfer of goods and services to the students, and we have increasingly indirect control. We can have a good deal of input with our own school board, less input with the state education, and then we get the federal programs like No Child Left Behind, and what if they deserve to be left behind?
So taken to the extreme, are you talking about homeschooling? I mean, what?
Oh, no, not at all. I'm just talking about the fact that anytime anytime you start politically distributing goods and services, you are creating more power. You are giving power to politics, and that power that you give to politics is power that you lose over yourself. And if the wrong people come to be in charge of the political system, and each of us, of course, has his or her own idea of who the wrong people are, but let's suffice it to say that we all believe that there are some wrong people out there, and if the wrong people get a hold of this political power, you're going to be very unhappy. So my feeling here, my gut feeling is just that we should always be very careful when we use the political system to redistribute goods and services, to move things around in our society, because it's going to create more politicians. It breeds kittens.
Okay.
Or
so
something worse than kittens.
The other two legs of that stool are the freedom and responsibility, and you're kind of tough on the baby boomers, of which you are one and I'm one. And why is that?
We suck. That was a simple answer from the front row.
Do you think
we suck.
we're spoiled?
No, well, yes, but no. I mean, the baby boomers just had something happen to them, Now, you can't really blame the baby boomers for Medicare. You can't blame them for unfunded Social Security, for the huge entitlement programs. It was actually our parents that came up with all that junk. I mean, I'm sure that they meant well, and that they were, looking for a good. It wasn't our generation that actually came up with all that stuff. It was the generation beginning with Roosevelt's election in 1932. But so it isn't that the baby boom has been grabby so much in the political system. It's just that we're an odd bunch. We are the first middle-class generation in any country in history, the first middle-class majority generation to have ever occurred in the entire history of mankind. We're rich as the world counts riches. And the world counts riches basically as anything above $3 a day. And, we are above $3 a day. So we're this rich generation. And we also came of age at a time when the sort of restraints upon society, the natural restraints upon society that come from the family, our parents were getting divorced. The church was molesting boys. A lot of the traditional aspects of society had been through a very traumatic half a century. They'd been through a world war, they'd been through Prohibition, they'd been through Depression, they'd been through another world war, they'd been through Elvis. They were tired. The institutions, so we had all the freedoms of prosperity, plus we had all the freedoms of the relaxation of everything from sexual mores to simple good taste, and we acted like rich brats have acted all down through history. We all went out there and acted like Lord Byron, and it didn't work out for him, and it's not working out for us.
Well, in your college years, you identified yourself as a communist, which is
that was to get girls.
Because what? The left-wing girls were easy, or what? Is that what are you saying here?
Easier for me.
Yeah.
Seriously, that's how I became a leftist. I never really did understand I was adamant about being a leftist, but I never read any Karl Marx because it was boring, And Mao, I had Mao's little red book, but you ever look inside that thing? Whoa, you could read the phone book; it'd be much more interesting. I was walking down the street in my first weekend at college, and a little weedy freshman, and there were two bars, one on each side of the street. And the bars had sort of patios out in front of the bars with all the college kids sitting on the patios. And the bar on one side of the street had all these really cute sorority girls, a little sorority flip that was popular in 1965, little skirts daringly worn above the knee, and, sort of well-filled sweaters. And gosh, those guys, but the guys around them were these big hulking football players and these kind of smooth-looking frat guys, and I thought, gosh, those girls are cute, but the guys, I'm not in a fraternity, I'm not rich, I'm not handsome, I'm not athletic, and even if I do, like somehow wheedle my way in with that crowd of people, I've got a bad feeling that in order to get where I kind of want to go at 18, if you know what I mean, there'd be a lot of, getting pinned and maybe even engagement rings, a lot of talks about our future and so on and so forth.
Let's
now,
talk.
the bar on the other side of the street, there were some equally fetching girls who ironed their hair, and wore drindle skirts and peasant blouses, leotards and little dance slippers, and smoked unfiltered Camels and drank beer right out of the bottle, and were playing guitars and singing Kumbaya. And I looked over at those girls and I thought, those girls are cute, and I'll bet they do it. And they did. And, being like, as long as you moped around in a poetic sort of way, it was all right not to be tall or handsome or, athletic. And so I came home at Christmas break with a jean jacket with a big red fist on the back, my hair all grown out all over the place, And my grandmother, who was a rock-ribbed Republican from downstate Illinois, she looks at me and she goes, "Pat, I'm worried about you. Are you becoming a Democrat?" I said, "Grandma, Lyndon Johnson is a Democrat. He's a fascist pig. Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, they're all alike. They're all fascist pigs murdering innocent Viet Cong and who knows what else. Of course I'm not a Democrat. I'm a communist." And my grandmother looked at me and she said, "Well, just as long as you're not a Democrat."
So somewhere along the line, you must have had a eureka moment. I mean, you became first a Republican and then a conservative Republican, two different things in your book. What were those moments?
Well, it wasn't actually any one road to Damascus moment. I think it was just, the process of growing up. I mean, the first thing that happened to me was I got a job, a little late, I mean, a lot of people my age had jobs and stuff, but I was about 23, 24 and kind of hadn't had a job, and because I was a hippie, and finally I kind of ran out of money being a hippie, and it never paid well. So I got this job, and I got paid $150 a week, and we got paid every 2 weeks, and I was really looking forward to that $300, and so was my landlord, I may say. And I go get my paycheck, and I net it out at $185.90 or something like that, after federal tax and state tax and city tax and Social Security and pension fund contribution and union dues and all the rest of the stuff. And I'm going, wait a minute. I've been yelling for socialism, screaming for socialism, demonstrating in the streets for socialism. I get a job, this capitalist pig corporation. I find out we've got socialism already. They just took half my money, What have I been on about? So that was a little bit of a wake-up call. But that didn't really change my mind. And it was a whole sort of gradual process. I watched my hippy-dippy friends getting older, and this get up and behavior and so on that had been kind of cute when everybody was 19 and still kind of cute when everybody was 20. By the time everybody was 25, 26, it was getting less cute, And one day I was walking down the street and I caught my reflection of myself at an odd angle. You know how that happens sometimes? You caught it in a store window. And I didn't realize that I was looking at me, and I saw a reflection of myself. And I thought, that guy's a little old to be dressed up like that kind of idiot, I just, should get a haircut. And I realized, ooh, it's me. Maybe I should start thinking about this stuff a little bit, And it was gradual, but and I gradually turned into a Republican, as aging white males tend to do. And, but I didn't really become a conservative, a real conservative, until the first kid was born. That's what turns people conservative, because, a conservative, really, what defines a conservative is a desire to avoid all change, to stop, what would Bill Buckley say, to stand athwart history yelling, stop, to stop change in everything. And once you got this baby crawling around on the floor, you become afraid of any change, a change in the position of the refrigerator magnets, because they could wind up inside the kid in just a moment, and you're scared about the change the kid's going through, is she late to crawl? Is she crawling too fast, square into the table leg? You just, every form of, any change in the temperature of the room worries you. Any change in the temperature of the kid sends you into an absolute cold sweat. All change becomes really terrifying once you're a parent.
So that's an interesting definition of conservative Republican, just terrified.
Terrified, yeah, terrified. Although I want to point out that I am terrified and armed.
Yeah, we hear tell.
Yeah.
What do you make of the Tea Party movement? You mentioned it before. I mean, these people talk about themselves as libertarians, and even President Obama sort of made a tip of the hat recently that yes, their forebears were the Tea Partiers of the Revolutionary War. And do you feel a connection with these folks?
Oh, sure. These are my neighbors up in New Hampshire. Basically, I feel anything that really upsets Frank Rich, I'm in favor of. Frank is my litmus test. If it makes Frank mad, it's got to be good. So I don't really think that there is such a thing as the Tea Party. I think that there are a bunch of people in America who are concerned specifically about the size, scope, and expense of particularly the federal government, but all local and state governments also, and who are worried that we have a rule book, we have a playbook set down, we have a set of laws, and we have a set of basic principles behind those laws, and that we've lost sight of some of those things, particularly, for instance, the 10th Amendment, the enumerated powers. It says that unless these powers are specifically given to the federal government or specifically given to the states, they are reserved to the states or to the people themselves. And it's interesting, all the people who call the Tea Partiers a bunch of ignorant morons, can't pronounce things and can't get their subject to agree with their verb. Just ask these people about the Constitution. Go out and ask a liberal what amendment in the Bill of Rights specifies separation of church and state. Ask that to any random liberal. Now, and you'll get a variety of different answers, and usually the First Amendment. Now ask it to somebody in the Tea Party, and they will tell you, it ain't in there. It's not there. There is no amendment that specifies separation of church and state. The only thing the First Amendment says is that the government shall not establish a religion, that there's not going to be one religion for everybody in the United States. It's officially sanctioned and officially. But there's no mention anywhere in the Constitution of separation in church and state. So who's dumb here? These people are really working hard to try and understand and some of these people are not the best educated people in the world, and some of them aren't the most articulate people in the world, and some of them don't have all their ideas thought through, and some of them are flakes. Any populist movement it's a big cloak, and it's going to attract lint, and dog hair and all sorts of, so you're going to get your nuts with any populist movement.
Well, that guy in New York, Palladino, is that what?
Palladino is
very angry
and incoherent, as opposed to everybody else in New York. Looks to me like he suits his environment.
Well, while we're on anger, a lot of folks are bemoaning sort of the death of civil discourse, that there's too much anger in our political debate. What happened to civil discourse? Did we ever have it?
No, I hear a lot about this as, this is the most polarized period we've ever been through in America. And I'm going, it is? It's civil rights movement. People were getting killed. That was so polarized. What about the, Vietnam? You know, that wasn't a polarizing moment. What about 1860? Now that was polarized. Half the country left, you know? I mean, this is not one of the most polarized moments in American history. And I don't, you know, the discourse is maybe it's not as civil as we would sometimes like it to be, but it's really well within normal political parameters. I don't see anything surprising or shocking or strange.
But are we becoming people who just listen to the sound of our own choirs? Fox has its audience, MSNBC has its audience. They sing to their own choirs. And, oh, by the way, MSNBC has a new slogan, lean forward. Have you heard this?
Lean forward and fall over.
What is that? What does that mean?
I haven't got the damnedest idea.
Fair and balanced, I think, is Fox's, and which is also meaningless when it's applied to them. So I'm just wondering, why don't they just say what they are? Lean right, lean
We're
left.
a bunch of pinkos.
Okay.
Or at least that's the niche we've carved out for ourselves. You know, what we actually believe, who cares, you know? You know, it was always thus. There was a brief moment in the United States when the consolidation of major newspapers left most cities, most medium-sized cities, with only one newspaper. And when the advent of television in its early stages gave us basically only 3 networks, there was a brief period lasting maybe a quarter of a century or so where there was a very strong effort among a lot of media outlets to be nonpartisan, or to be bipartisan, or to be fair and balanced, or whatever. But that actually goes against the grain of American media from the get-go. I mean, were the Federalist Papers not something that had, you know, a point of view? You know, I mean, most newspapers were rabidly partisan up until the point where medium-sized media markets began to be reduced to a single newspaper, and that newspaper had to answer to all the readers in that media market. Television always had a kind of a strong hand you know, television at the onset had kind of a strong hand of government overseeing it, and there was a kind of gentleman's agreements among the networks to at least, you know, give the appearance of bipartisanship. With the multiplicity of media outlets that we have now, everybody has dropped the disguise of nonpartisanship, and I actually think it's a healthy thing.
Not everybody, I don't think.
Well, I actually think it's a healthy thing, because when I read somebody or watch somebody, I want to know who they are. I want to know from which direction the wind is blowing. There were many, many years where the New York Times, you know, had this sort of Olympian attitude, as though they were above it all. Well, that was total BS. I mean, they were typical East Coast, big city, you know, prestigious college, liberal-minded people, progressives. They were leaning forward. They always had been that way. And now they have to admit it, because the Wall Street Journal is right out there on their tail every minute, you know, saying, hey, wait a minute, you know. But there was a lot, and I still think that this exists in media, that you will read stories where people just presume, you can tell that their logical assumptions, things that they just absolutely take on faith, give them a certain sort of political point of view. Michael Kinsley, in the most recent issue of The Atlantic, had one telling word in there. He's talking about the baby boom taking up too much of America's resources, and how the baby boom should maybe be, you know, maybe refrain from taking quite so many resources. He talked about how the baby boom should give money to the government, but in there was a word: give money back to the government. And what does that tell you about everything that Michael Kinsley believes? He believes money comes from the government. He believes that all our goods and services, our wealth, the things that we make and do, that it comes from the government, that it's bestowed upon us on earth. It's an obnoxious idea. And it's wrong, incidentally, just from an economic point of view. But, you know, people have these logical premises, and I like to see them naked. You know, I like to know what people think.
Of course, a lot of newspapers are going away, and you make your living with the printed word. It's not you know, it doesn't have to be printed on newsprint necessarily, of course, for us to make a living. But what do you make of that? I mean, do you think that,
I hate it. I hate it. I hate the internet, and I'll tell you why I hate the internet. Is because internet sends the message, often explicit, otherwise implicit, that content is free. I've been writing for a living for 40 years. Up until recently, I was a writer. Now I am a content provider, and content is free. Why should this be? Well, I'll tell you why it is. The internet was invented by academics and the military, or as we may call them, communists and fascists. The internet is like the Stalin-Ribbentrop Pact of media. Of course it doesn't make money, you know. It was invented by academics and the military, you know.
So is it fair to assume you don't tweet?
I don't.
No Facebook?
No. I have this idea actually for butt book where you put people you really can't stand. Something I'm going to start, you know.
And they'll make a movie about you.
Then I'll give $100 million to the Newark school system. In a pig's eye. That was a great sand down a rat hole ideas of recent time. No, I don't. I occasionally make bird noises, but only from a duck blind. Lure the little devils in where I can shoot them.
Your chapter on climate change is just one page long. Actually, it's not.
Not even.
It's
doesn't
not
even
even
fill
a
the page.
It's not even one page, actually. Right?
No, doesn't even fill
Why
the
is
page.
that?
Because there is nothing you can do about it. It may be climate change, the theory of climate change is right, maybe it's wrong, but it doesn't matter. There's nothing you can do about it because there are 1.3 billion Chinese who want a Buick. And I don't want to be the person to go over there and tell all 1.3 billion Chinese, you can't have a Buick, you know, because glaciers are melting, you know. And then, you know, if you were to survive making that announcement in China, then you go over to 1.1 billion or whatever it is over in India and tell them that they can't have a Buick, you know, or whatever it is that they want to have. You know.
Okay.
It's not going to happen.
We could go down that rabbit hole, but I just wanted to.
Beachfront property in Greenland, invest now.
TARP.
TARP.
Has just ended, basically. I mean, it just wrapped it up this week. Troubled Asset Relief Program. I'm going to just guess that you weren't for bailing out the too big to fail guys.
I love the whole idea of too big to fail. How much do I have to eat before I get too big to fail? You know, I'm big to fail. What makes capitalism so good? Why does capitalism work so well? A lot of people say, oh, it's because it's successful. Yes, because it fails. 9/10 of all capitalist ideas go right down the sewer where they belong. You know, they go with peapod.com. You know, and it's the beauty of capitalism is it allows a bad idea to get smaller until it goes away. When governments have a bad idea, they just keep getting bigger. I'll give you a simple example: World War I. You know, when governments have a bad idea, they really don't know what to do when it's not working except throw more resources at it. Public education would be like second after World War I as an example of, you know, just keep throwing resources at something that isn't working. And capitalism simply does not allow that to happen. And so it's very hard to, when you come to something like the financial crisis, the initial infusion of capital back into the world banking system, then you're getting on trickier ground. I mean, there is precedent for pumping money into a frozen system of credit. J.P. Morgan, 1907, there was a very severe crisis in 1907. J.P. Morgan invited the most prominent investment bankers in New York over to his house on 36th Street, and he brought them into the library, and he went over to the door, and he locked the door, and he put the key in his pocket, and he said, nobody leaves until we figure this thing out. And that was their answer, was to pump a lot more money back into a frozen credit system in order to break that freeze. So the initial Federal Reserve reaction to this, initial government reaction to this extreme financial crisis was not all wrong, but you got to be very, very dubious about the bailout of these industries, and you also have to be very dubious about the kind of political logic that goes beyond to say, oh, well, we saved jobs and we stimulated the economy. Using that kind of just that basis, I can rationalize practically anything using that kind of political logic. For instance, I can justify shooting 7-Eleven clerks. Shooting 7-Eleven clerks stimulates the economy. I mean, it does. It creates jobs in high-paying domestic manufacturing sectors such as gun and ammunition factories. It lowers unemployment as the 7-Eleven has to fill the night shift. It causes the hiring of more security guards, mortuary personnel, emergency room technicians and doctors and so on. The money from the shooting the 7-Eleven clerk is spent as an economic stimulus in the areas, the poor neighborhoods that need the stimulus most, because that's where the guys that shoot the 7-Eleven clerks go to buy their crack, and using this kind of logic, you end up thinking, well, gee, why isn't everybody in Congress, out shooting 7-Eleven clerks and smoking crack right now, considering all the good it does,
Wow. You begin to see why there's only a few conservative, funny people. Okay. We have a great system here in California. We like to govern by initiative. And I would think that libertarians would love this state because we have just literally taken away from the legislature, and we have these immense books that arrive in our homes around election time.
Proposition 3,000,008.
That's right. And it's going to
no
repeal
more
the
brown shoes with a blue suit.
Right. It's pretty wild. So we've got a lot of props coming up. One of them would legalize marijuana here. So what do you what do you think of that one, and what do you think of the whole process? I mean, that would seem to me to be
process
ideal.
is stupid.
But it is the people taking back the power.
It so happens that where you get this from is not from good people, it's from people who are leaning forward. It's from the progressive movement at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. And these were Eastern elitists, very convinced that they knew best, and and this is where city planning comes from. This is where all our stupid highways that run right through the middle of our cities and wreck them all came from this progressive movement in the early 20th century. And California's went through a period early in the 20th century where it reformed its constitution and allowed for these propositions. And the idea itself is not so bad that the people can get engaged in this. It gives you a couple of huge disadvantages, however. One thing is that it detracts from the whole business of being a republic, of selecting people to go to a legislature to make these decisions at our behest. If we can constantly second guess them, their power to make these decisions is badly undercut. That's one problem. Second bigger problem, and it really doesn't have anything to do with left or right, is kind of a principle of life. It's a principle of personal life, it's a principle of financial life, it's a principle of political life, which is this. Beyond a certain point, complexity is fraud. I give you airline ticket pricing, just for an example, phone packages. Beyond a certain point, complexity is fraud. And when you make your political system sufficiently over-complex, you are basically turning it over to America's tax code, which would fill this room. Our federal tax code is corrupt. It is so complex that Timothy Geithner, Secretary of the Treasury, misread it and didn't pay his taxes.
So
Republicans were so wrong, incidentally, about that. Republicans jumped on Geithner because he didn't pay his taxes. That's the wrong argument. You got to say, this guy is one of the most brilliant financial people in the world, and he couldn't figure out the taxes. Isn't there something wrong with the taxes? No, take the guy at his word, you know? I mean, I know he's lying, but whatever. Back to marijuana. We're talking about a drug that makes teenage boys drive slow. Oh, yeah, all right. And we're stimulating the statewide pizza, yes, that's a very good point. The pizza industry, the Twinkie industry, the Malamar industry all go through the roof as a result of this. It's not going to help Michelle Obama's fight against obesity, I'm afraid. Yeah, I mean, I honestly
But
really
speaking
don't care.
of the free market, I was just up in Northern California talking to some folks about this prop and getting ready, and you would think Humboldt, which is synonymous with pot,
Yeah,
would be excited. They've got name recognition to die for. They're
branded.
they're
yeah.
branded, and yet there are quite a few people up there who are really not excited about legalization because they'd be taxed. No longer, the whole reason to farm there is because you're hiding in the hills. They don't have necessarily good soil, so if it goes to the Central Valley, they're going to be priced out of the market.
Yeah.
So they're actually, here's a place where you would think legalization would be yay, yay, and they're all going, maybe not. You know? So that's
No
a kind
progress without its price. That's right.
We have other things going on here in California. Meg Whitman and Jerry Brown running for governor.
She hired an alien. He is an alien. Glad I don't have to make the choice.
Yeah, the nanny thing is interesting. Anyway, she spent $119 million of her own money so far, set a record. Campaign finance reform, should we just let them spend their own money?
Oh, hell yes. You know, it's just redistribution. By and large, the great majority of campaign money is wasted. It's income redistribution. You know, there's a lot of bright, hard-charging young kids out there writing the campaign literature and knocking on doors and going around, and they're getting paid. And rich people who want to buy public office are paying these people to go around and do this, and usually not getting the office anyway. And who cares if they do? You know, I mean, there are a lot of people in the history of this country who have essentially bought their political office. I think it would be interesting to go through historically and try and sort it out and see whether these people have been any worse than the average politician. I mean, Jack Kennedy bought the presidency in 1960, arguably. He certainly bought Cook County, or his dad did. Was he a worse person than Nixon? You know, who worked for it? You know, Dick worked for his presidency. Jack just bought his. You know, which is necessarily the worst. I would say the same thing would go with IQ. You know, are the dumbest politicians necessarily the worst politicians? Are the smartest politicians necessarily the best politicians? Jimmy Carter is reputed to have had a very high IQ. Worked great for him. You know? So,
George Bush.
George Bush actually had better grades at Yale than Al Gore, oddly enough. I don't think either one of them was in danger of becoming class valedictorian. So, you know, I don't really give a damn, you know, who spends what on this. You know, if we can't look at a candidate, listen to a candidate, and decide whether the person is the, you know, lesser of two evils, which is usually what it comes down to, occasionally least of three evils, you know, if we can't do that, then we probably shouldn't be voting anyway. You know, I mean, there's, and I am incidentally very much in favor of keep in the vote. I would like to begin a whole keep in the vote campaign that goes on as public service on television, saying, if you don't know anything about the issues, you don't know anything about the candidates, and you haven't been keeping, why don't you just light up a doobie and stay home? You know, who needs you? Speaking of getting out the vote, I don't think this is going to work with Obama's out there like begging and pleading and whining with the youth vote to come back to the youth vote had never voted before, and they're probably never going to vote again. They came out once for him, because they thought he was a rap star or something, and it turns out he wasn't. And this is the same guy who just the week before was talking about extending the school year and putting carrots in everybody's lunch, He's not getting the youth vote.
Of course, when you have people who don't know what's going on and not voting and not caring, we get the city of Bell. Do you know about our city of Bell?
I certainly do. Yes, that
story
was,
that keeps on giving.
That was that was naked government. That was government, which
Yeah.
It was a great little lesson in civics down there.
Yeah. Well, so you don't have anything more to say about it. You just okay. I think there's one council person left. Is that it? And this poor guy wasn't on the take. I want to know what's wrong with him. Like one guy.
It illustrates my point. He probably was not on take because DUM dumb. Didn't know how much a whole mess of nines were. Does that make him the worst politician in Bell? I don't think so.
In your book, you sort of sum up everything with a solution for all of this, which is piracy.
Yes, yeah. I love pirates. Very early in the Obama administration, they went after the Somali pirates, and got, nailed a couple of them. And I thought, this is great. Maybe we can distract this guy from his odious domestic agenda, by getting them all interested in pirate suppression, That's something. Even the Democratic Party isn't so broad-based that they've got a pirate constituency that they have to answer to. So I just think that that's the kind of thing that hauls from the shores of Tripoli. It's the Marines are still singing about it. From the Barbary pirates, and I'm just thinking that fighting piracy is the kind of thing that politicians ought to be doing. In fact, we ought to arm them up, tell them to go man up, get in their boats, and go fight pirates themselves. And it's got a long history. Julius Caesar was he was a young kind of hack politician in Rome, didn't have much of a rep, and held any high offices, and he got captured by pirates and held for ransom on the island of Rhodes. And he told the pirates, he said, I'm coming back here, and I'm going to kill you all. And they thought, he's a politician, he's full of it, And by golly, he did. And the next thing you know, he was elected to high political office. It worked for him. Queen Elizabeth was, when she wasn't sending out pirates of her own, was very down on pirates. It's always popular to killing pirates.
And it would eliminate the bipartisan rage, or the partisan rage, I should say. I mean, everybody gets behind
gets behind killing pirates, yeah.
Yeah, Well, I want to open it up to Q&A from the audience with just, we have about 10 minutes or so to do that. But just remember that a question has a question mark at the end, and is a short statement. Not a statement, it's a short question, it's a sentence. So please don't, go on and on and on with your own stuff. Okay? So does anybody have? Yes.
I don't know. They just called, and they called, and it actually was not long after 9/11 that they called, and I think they just, they go like, who the hell is going to be dumb enough to go on a comedy radio show after 9/11, And I guess the answer was me. And not that I made a bunch of World Trade Center jokes, I certainly didn't, but it was kind of touch and go there in that first few months after the World Trade Center attacks, and so no, I don't know. I really don't know what their thinking was. I think political balance, possibly, to be the lone voice of the Republican Party on all of NPR.
Really everywhere, if you think about it. George.
I really don't have any. I hated school, so I'm probably not the right person to ask about how to fix school. But I think it did work. Oh, there's absolutely no doubt that a free public education is an enormously important thing for a society. But of course, there are a lot of different ways to achieve that free public education. I mean, there are charter schools, there are vouchers, there are something is wrong. There is no doubt about that. I think very few people are satisfied with their public schools, and those who are satisfied with their public schools, like my wife said, my wife went to high school in Westport, Connecticut. And she said, God, my public school was great. I'd send the kids I want to send the kids to public school. And I said, honey, the school was public, the suburb was private. Anybody could go to the school, nobody could live in the suburb, So, there are plenty of cases around America of excellent public schools, but we also know that something is not working very well at a lot of the schools. One big difference between school when we were in school and school now is the idea of school being dangerous. It was just, almost beyond our ken. School was dangerous for me, but it was the teachers who were the danger, not my fellow students. Order and discipline are absolutely necessary to education. More's the pity. That's why I always hated it. Something needs to be done to restore that. I'm no expert in this field, but I do know this one thing. It's not, strictly speaking, a matter of money. We are now spending, in inflation-adjusted terms, considerably more than we were spending in the 50s, the 60s, and 70s, and we are not getting better test results from this. The average, I got my public school budget I live in this little idyllic area of New Hampshire, and we've got a nice, public school, and we're spending in our school district, we're spending like $17,500 per year per kid. And the school system's fine, but it's not stellar, it's okay. And I'm thinking, geez, gather together like 15, 20 of these kids in a group, and you could hire Aristotle for that kind of money. They wouldn't have band practice, but they'd have Aristotle, for what we are spending per student per year, in most places, there are exceptions to this. But for instance, Washington, D.C. has one of the has one of the worst public school systems in America, and it has one of the highest per capita student per capita expenditures, like $22,000 a year per kid per student for a system that everybody acknowledges is just junk. So that's not the answer. What the answer is, I don't know. I've always said one of the things that makes public education really such a difficult political question is what would happen to the politician who actually told the truth about public education, who stood up and said, no, I can't fix public education. The problem isn't teachers' unions or overcrowding in the classroom or underfunding or lack of computer equipment. The problem is your damn kids. I don't think he'd get elected.
Way back there, yes.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. I did a little this summer. I went to Afghanistan for my summer vacation. Great blast walls. Place just covered with blast walls. Also, great lamb chops, incidentally. And being a guy, I didn't have to wear the burqa, so it was like it was fun. Yeah, I'm back doing a little bit more of the travel writing. I'm hoping to head off to Venezuela soon to see what happens when democracy really goes bad.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, right here.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I do think that there have been some people of racist inclination have attached themselves to that. I think that the Tea Party has picked up a certain number of social conservatives. That's kind of a separate question, although there are, if you were looking for racism. I was more concerned, I think I've been more concerned by, I have never heard anything racist from any of the Tea Party people that I've talked to, but I haven't talked to all that many of them, and I've been talking to them in New Hampshire, so which is not exactly a hotbed of racism. I'm a little bit more concerned about xenophobia. The Tea Party people take a very strong line on immigration, and I personally don't. I mean, I'm not a Sioux or a Cheyenne. The O'Rourkes came over here like anybody else. I'm pro immigration. I mean, the whole idea of putting the U.S. Army down on the Mexican border so that you know that U.S. troops are standing between you and yard care. This doesn't
Speaking
do
of
a
which,
lot for me.
Did you hear about Lou Dobbs recently?
Lou Dobbs has said something else horrible?
No, the Nation magazine just had an investigative piece which says that Lou Dobbs has been hiring illegal aliens to illegal immigrants to, I've been corrected, to do his yard work and his house work.
Well, try not to. That's my advice. God, we got them in New Hampshire. Where'd they come from? You're like, you're going to, dude. You're like 3,000 miles from Mexico. How'd you get behind my lawnmower? I don't know. No, I tend to be, not obviously, given the sort of like insane crime spree that they're having down in northern Mexico, we don't want to exactly have open borders, but I have a Texas rancher friend, very conservative guy, and I would not have, picked this guy for a mush on the immigration issue, and he said, look, he's got a big ranch down by the border, and he said, look, I'm finding dead people out there. Women and children. He said, this is wrong. He said, this is just wrong. He said, at the very least, sort them in the daytime. We're sorting them in the middle of the night. Don't sort them in the dark, He said, I got guys working for me. He said, this is South Texas. A lot of these people are American citizens. They've always lived here. They lived here before there was a Texas, and they don't speak English. They're citizens every bit as, he said, but how do I tell whether the guy that's wrangling my horses and the guy that's branding the cattle, like which is which and who or who? He said, what I care about is I've got somebody that works hard for me and is a reliable employee. And, I think it's just, it's just wrong. And of course, the wrongest thing about it is if any of you have been through trying to get somebody legal, have been any of you, maybe some of you have tried to get visas for people to work for you, or you've tried to get somebody who worked for you to. We had a woman that worked for us, and she came in legally, but she'd overstayed her visa. She was separated from her Filipino woman. She was separated from her 2 children and her husband for 6 years getting through the immigration. Finally, they're American citizens now, and they live in the United States. They're American citizens. They went through all the hoops, but it was 6 years of separation. That's inhuman. That's inhuman. That's horrible. And then we had another similar thing with friends of ours that had somebody working for them who again tried to do all the paperwork and went to our senator, went to our congressman. Their offices could not move the Immigration and Naturalization Service off top dead center, could not get any action. And this was when the Republicans were in control of Congress. Republican congressman and Republican senator still couldn't get any, not the outcome we desired, any outcome. Couldn't get any outcome, couldn't get any movement on the paperwork, couldn't even get the wrong decision. And this has got to go. This has got to be fixed. And so I am a little concerned, but I'm not positive that the Tea Party is much more adamant about this than an awful lot of Americans have a very bad attitude towards immigration, as though I'd understand it if all those Americans were Cheyenne and Sioux, and Iroquois, but I don't think they are. Otherwise, they'd have casinos.
We have time for one more question.
It's a mess, and President Obama's method of cleaning up this mess is going to make the mess worse. It is what we need in this country and should have is a catastrophic insurance system. We don't want people to be beggared by their medical bills. We don't want people to be unable to pay their medical bills. We don't want to, when I get tennis elbow, I don't want to have to pay for somebody's 9mm gunshot wound, because, I go to the hospital for my tennis elbow and my bill comes back and it's covering a bunch of other junk, because that hospital has, got to pay its rent, got to keep its lights on. We need catastrophic medical coverage, but we also need to get over the idea that medical care is like stuff on the internet, free. There is this, we have come to regard medical care as a right. We have to pay for our medical care. I'll take my own father-in-law as an example. He had open heart surgery. He's 85, when he was 84 years old, he had open heart surgery. Now, I gotta say, my father-in-law is paid into the system. He was a 25-year FBI veteran. He was a World War II infantry combat veteran before that. And he was, well over Medicare age, but he was also spent, after he got out of the FBI, he was a corporate executive, and he made a fair amount of money. He was a prosperous guy. I asked my wife at the end of all this, the medical care, I said, what do you suppose your old man is out net from open heart surgery? And she said, oh, I don't know, $1,500. $2,000. And I thought, shit. I mean, I don't want this guy to pay the whole bill. Like I say, he's a vet, 25 years being in the FBI, not getting paid an awful lot of money. He's got some benefits coming to him. But he's also a prosperous man. Shouldn't that decimal point be moved, like maybe just one? I mean, he could afford that. And of course, I'm arguing against my own kid's inheritance, in a sense, But I mean, I can afford to pay a certain amount of money for my medical care, and I do, because I'm self-employed, I have catastrophic insurance. I have $5,000 deductible per person in my household, which means that my medical bills, I've got 3 kids, my medical bills can be as high as $25,000 a year. Now, it so happens that I'm not going to be comfortable paying that, but I can do it. I can do it without losing the house. And we have to move towards a system where people take some of their own damn responsibility about their medical care and get a more rational system of payment. Obama really offended me, among other things, by putting this in terms of insurance. That he was going to provide insurance. Like insurance is supposed to cover every time you crack a saucer, every time a light bulb goes out, the insurance is supposed to come in and cover that. He knew that we all hated our insurance companies, and there's an easy target. And also, it's just like a wrong framing of the argument. When your house is on fire, except maybe in Tennessee, do you call Allstate? Or do you call 911? It's treatment is what matters. He presented us with a situation where he's basically saying we can provide more medical care, better medical care to a larger number of people, and it's going to cost less. Now, I only got as far as practical math in high school, but that doesn't add up. It was not a proud moment for me when Joe Wilson, the representative from South Carolina, when he yelled, "You lie," at the president, when President Obama was giving his health care speech to both houses of Congress. Joe was rude. Joe was in violation of parliamentary rules. Joe may not have been sober. But was Joe wrong? Nobody's ever told me that.
Well, I don't always agree with you, but I always find you provocative and funny, and I'm sure the whole audience would agree, and thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. Fabulous. Funny book.